All right, awesome. So thank you for that intro, and thank you for the opportunity to tell a little bit of our story. Some of that story is things we did together. Some of it is things that sort of came about afterwards, but it's nevertheless an interesting story of peer learning at Twitter, problems we ran into, how we solved them. So um, while the title of this is how Twitter University helps engineers get up to speed faster through peer learning at scale, what we really want to emphasize is how do we get about 100 classes per month, about 3,000 registrations per month at an average NPS of 70 with only 2 instructors and 2 program managers. That's roughly sort of the background of this story. So what is Twitter University? We are a team that helps engineers get up to speed faster. And by that, we don't just focus on onboarding. We think that engineers are constantly needing to get up to speed, whether it's when they first join the company or whether it's when they need to acquire a new skill or acquire a new version of an existing skill because things are constantly shifting. We are located within the engineering org. So there are other learning and development or learning and development sort of organizations within Twitter that we partner with, but we are specifically funded and organized within engineering, even though our name may apply a larger scope. And our primarily bread and butter, what we focus on, what we live for, is helping engineers learn about things at Twitter. So as you will hear me talk about repeatedly, is we don't really do a lot of commodity knowledge sharing, or we don't work with a lot of vendors. We tend to sort of focus on how do we talk about the application of technology at Twitter, whether it's how do we do machine learning or data science or build applications or build services and so forth. It's all about the application of it at Twitter. So what do we offer? I already mentioned up to 100 classes per month, up to 3,000 registrations, up to 6,000 student hours a month. This obviously varies, and this is one of our leading metrics, although there are others. And at 70 MPS, which is, again, one of our leading metrics. There are other quality metrics, but this is the one that we look at. We also have hundreds, like a catalog of course videos and other kind of self-paced learning, but that's actually not what we build as a first class priority. It's more like an after or side effect of our peer-based learning. And we also are starting to scale up our mentorship programs. Now, who are we? So the team is composed of 2 program managers, 2 professional instructors, half a software engineer, half an engineering manager, which actually used to be me up until recently. I just finally hired someone else to take over the team, which is exciting. 1 sister team, which is technical documentation team with whom we work very closely. And then, and this is kind of the key point, 200 plus engineers who have full-time jobs building software or supporting software at Twitter, but take time out of their day to help teach what they know to their fellow colleagues. Over time, this has been about 10 to 20% of our engineering workforce. So what is peer learning? We talk a little bit about that in the title, but the term is sort of a little bit loosely defined. If you look it up on Wikipedia, there are kind of 2 meanings. One is that it's about cooperative learning. So within a classroom setting, people helping teach each other and helping each other sort of learn by helping explain their fellow sort of students how things work. And I think this is a good pedagogical tool, and we do use it, but that's not kind of what this talk is about. What we're really referring to is learning for everyone, by everyone, about almost anything. It's about learning across time and space. And of course, in our context, that's by engineers on technical topics for other engineers. And some people refer to it as peer-to-peer learning. Now, this concept dates back to the beginning of the last century. So it's not something that we invented. It's been around the block, so to say. But the interest over time, if at least looking at the Google trend, the way this concept has at least been named, or at least the way we refer to it, seems to be rather flat. But when we talk to our peers in the industry, we do see that they, in fact, do apply this approach. They do leverage their engineering workforce, and they do tap into the talent that it's already there to help spread the knowledge. So Airbnb, Netflix, Google, even Yahoo, they all have similar programs to what we have. Now, what's interesting is kind of the path to how we got here. Marco mentioned that our previous company was acquired and we founded Twitter University. And while the initial problem was very acute, like leveling up the entire engineering workforce on mobile, we've kind of solved that very quickly. And we're very competent and had strong expertise in a number of technical topics like Scala, like Android, like Python, Hadoop, and so forth. But what we really realized very quickly is that the demand for this sort of what I now refer to as commodity knowledge was finite. There's only so many people that we can teach. We can't be sort of just cookie cutting the same thing over and over again. Instead, what people were looking for is, how do I apply these skills at Twitter? How do I do mobile application development at Twitter? How do I do data science at Twitter? How do I develop application services like microservices at Twitter? How do we do machine learning at Twitter? It was really the application of technology that we realized is where the value was, not in the skills that we brought with us when we joined the company. So the question that became, can we retool ourselves to become subject matter experts on everything at Twitter, especially given that things are constantly shifting and evolving? It's not like a stable state that we can just slowly ramp up on and then just continue to cookie cut from there. We saw that there was already a program that was kind of on the side that existed prior to us coming around helping welcome new engineers to Twitter. They called it Engineering Flight School. In fact, that's still the name, but others refer to it as just Engineering NHO. And what was interesting is that this program was run by engineers who had full-time jobs at the company, but they just felt inspired to greet newcomers and tell them stories, like, from how they started to stories around like the life of a tweet. How do things work and connect? And we saw that as a proof of concept. Like, there's already interest, people already willing and able to share their time and expertise. Can we tap into that? We realized that we were the subject matter experts on knowledge sharing, but we were not subject matter experts on everything else. So how can we tap into that expertise that's already there and scale it? And by the way, apologies if you're hearing some noise. There's a garbage truck passing by your street. So how do we go from teaching what we were good at to basically facilitating knowledge sharing on Twitter's topics, at Twitter scale, at a pace of change that is not probably just unique to Twitter, it's probably true for the entire industry, and with extremely limited staffing? And that's kind of the epiphany, is we have to do this through the expertise, time, and goodwill of others. So what were some of our early observations? People are already intrinsically motivated to teach. They, obviously not everyone, I said it's between 10 and 20%, but enough. And they came knocking on our doors even sometimes without our asking. They basically want to share what they know. They want to meet their colleagues. They want to demonstrate their own knowledge. They want to force themselves to get better at something by teaching it to others, or they want to represent their teams. They really don't require a lot of nudging or a lot of recognition, although I will talk about how we enable that too. But what they really want to avoid is friction. They just ideally want to show up and teach. They don't want to deal with the logistics, with booking, with wait lists, with making sure people come to the right place at the right time, with collecting feedback, with figuring out if they're doing well. All of these things are things that they want someone else to handle for them. And we realize that that's what we really should focus on. We need to scale up our impact. We need to increase the visibility of this, and we need to help create these feedback loops so folks can learn and move faster. So what are some of our other early observations? Spreadsheets and duct tape don't scale. People, that program that I mentioned, the Engineering Flight School, was run mostly with spreadsheets and calendar. That doesn't work well because at scale, we want consistency. We want people to know what to expect, and we want to avoid failures, especially because whenever you show up to a class and people go to the wrong room or the room has already been booked or some other logistical issue come up, it's pretty public and pretty demotivating, especially if you're volunteering your time. This isn't something that you like to do again. And so we made sure that we focus on reducing friction, reducing risk, and optimizing for that scale. We also focused on gradually onboarding people to teaching, helping them get better at the craft of teaching over time. So some of the key ingredients that we identified that make this possible is define and popularize best practices around this peer learning at scale. Create a platform or get a platform that helps you encode these best practices and help you remove a lot of the risk and a lot of the sort of toil work, as we refer to it, and help automate things. And then focus on coaching, on support and recognition, help amplify these things. So let's talk about these in turn. When it comes to best practices, we needed to help people understand that they were not there to just dump knowledge on people. People don't like drinking from the fire hose. We really needed to shift them from lecturing to knowledge transfer and knowledge retention. And that's actually one of the biggest challenges, I think, in getting sort of engineers to become effective instructors. We also needed to identify patterns for knowledge transfer. So not everything sort of is at the same level. So we needed to differentiate things that are just at the overview level versus when we want to give people a taste of a technology or a concept, or when we want to give them just the essentials, which is slightly sort of more involved, or the specific application of that at Twitter, or how things work on the inside, or some of the advanced concepts. By naming these things, we helped set the expectations both with the instructors as well as with the participants on what's in store for them. We also created a process by which we can test out new content for whether there's demand for it and how to make it basically meet that demand. So we identify a need, we select the type of the content or the instruction that we want to have. We work with the subject matter experts in creating a syllabus. We sometimes test that syllabus with prospective participants. We then help them create a draft. They go through a canary stage, maybe a beta stage, eventually launching it, and then iterating on it. That canary is actually, I think, a very interesting concept because we often would ship things half-baked, and the people attending these canary classes would know that their primary objective is to provide feedback, and they're not expecting perfection. And we realized that's actually a good thing because it enabled us to sort of validate ideas faster. We also realized that we needed to really keep things short. Prior to Twitter, we would have day-long, week-long classes, whereas here we broke things down into very short sections that are an hour to maybe 4 hours long. And we needed to keep them modular so that things can fit in the different learning paths. This made it easier to develop. This made it easier for people to fit it into their calendars and learn and sort of attend, and it made it easier to sort of maintain and kind of reuse in different scenarios. In everything that we do, we feel that it's important to contextualize it to Twitter because what it ultimately is, we feel this sort of helps people understand how this connects to their work, how it matters to our culture, to our business, and makes things more retentive, more interesting, more engaging. We also ask our instructors who have deep history at Twitter to bring their own stories into this, to use their own knowledge, whether it's war stories when things broke and didn't work according to plan, or stories how certain things came into existence. Because then people understand, as you know, people tend to learn better from stories as opposed to just abstract concepts. We never assume that people really care about what they want to learn, even when they come to our training classes. We don't do a lot of prescribed training. Almost all of their training is people self-enrolling, but we always ask our instructors to motivate the learning, to focus on the why, not on the what and the how, because that actually is something they can look up later. But they really just need to understand the why behind how things connect and develop a mental map for sort of onto which they can attach other concepts later. Obviously, hands-on is a big aspect of what we do. I don't need to explain why that is. And then finally, and this last point is actually turns out to be very important. We wanted to lower the cost of development and the maintenance of the content. Otherwise, it would be really high barrier to entry for people to develop as well as even attend these classes. The second second ingredient is the platform for learning. We realized that, again, duct tape and spreadsheets and calendar don't work. We really needed to create a platform that helps us encode these best practices and help us create consistent, repetitive, automated experience, and allows our team to shift to where we can add human value as opposed to sort of automatable value. So we call our platform Go Learn. It's a Ruby on Rails web app that offers a number of features. I'll just go through these quickly just to give you a taste of it. Things like course cataloging, artifact storage, so we can keep, for example, like labs and slides or other kind of content related to the catalog. Fairly complex event scheduling and classroom scheduling across multiple time zone offices and so forth, which tends to be a failure case, one of the big ones, in fact, when scheduling goes wrong. A pretty sort of robust sign up, waitlist, request, and subscription workflows. So people can automatically get, added to the wait list and automatically removed from the wait list when a spot opens up. They can request a class that doesn't exist. They can subscribe to class so they get notified every time it happens for meetup style classes. And then very deep and rich calendar integration, because we realize that we need to bring this where people are. People all, depend on their calendars, and we want to make sure that they see the thing that they're, want to attend and then don't miss it. We also have capabilities for automatic reminders, so people, again, are less likely to forget about things, both for instructors, organizers, and participants. Automatic feedback collection and reporting, video storage, playback, and tracking. As for some small percentage of what we do is also available through video. Very robust learning path management, so that enables us to sort of organize things into sort of longer arcs of learning. I'll mention that later. And then things like pro tips for microlearning that we can embed in different places around the office. Discovery and search. For example, we have that, well, now it's kind of doesn't matter because everyone's at home, but we have these monitors around the office, for example, that show upcoming classes and who sign up for them. We also do email blasts and other forms of marketing to ensure people sort of find out about these opportunities. We do compliance management, or have capabilities for that, although that's not our favorite things to do. We have very detailed reporting and analytics, which makes this possible for us to understand how we're doing over time, or where the demand may be, or where we need to pay more attention in terms of quality. And then delegate administration, I'll mention later, because this is one way that enables us to scale. And then the Twitter look and feel. It sort of feels Twittery because it's connected to the rest of our ecosystem, and people feel like it's part of their natural day-to-day experience. And then the last ingredient is sort of what we think we need to do in order to sort of, drive value. And that is to provide coaching, support, and recognition. So we, for example, create larger stories. So for example, our NH show or the flight school, we create a story of creating a new feature on the Twitter platform and how, that will connect end to end. And then we work with our instructors to build the modules that plug into that story. Or say you're building a new service, a team may create a content for how to, kick off a first service, and another person may create a content on how to productionize the service. But we want to make sure these things connect. They kind of tell a larger narrative, because again, we feel this is more retentive. We see it as our job to help test out new ideas to understand where the demand is. So as I mentioned before, we have this like canary process. Even before canary process, sometimes we would go and create a course on our system that doesn't even exist and schedule it as if it was already there, just to see whether there's actual real demand for it. And then we would work with the instructor to go and develop it. We see it as our job, again, of connecting supply and demand. The supply is the people who have something to share and teach, and the demand is folks who are looking to advance themselves or level up on these organizational know-how practices that enable them to do their jobs. And finally, we do spend quite a bit of our time dealing with things that can't quite be automated. Things like, something blows up in the logistics, or there's an AV issue, something that we can't really encode into our system, and we need humans to help with. Obviously, we do a lot of marketing, as I mentioned before. We do quality control. So for example, we get automatically notified when things are below a certain quality threshold, which enables us to follow up with both the students and the instructor and consider whether it's a missed expectation, whether it's content that needs to be improved or instructional approach needs to be tuned. And then we have a larger sort of program we call Go Teach, which is essentially an ongoing effort to help recruit new instructors and get existing instructors to learn from each other through a community, to make sure they're recognized, in some cases even rewarded, and to make sure that things are show up on career ladders and are seen from our management, that this is something that they do and are contributing to, so that they're able to sort of feel recognized for that work. And obviously management buy-in is a thing that we constantly have to pay attention to, because we want the managers not only to recognize the learning, but actually more importantly recognize the teaching. In fact, like Go Teach is sort of one of the things we celebrate even more than Go Learn. So why peer learning? Why don't we do videos? Why don't we do tutorials? Why don't we do, you know, content labs or sort of code labs or sort of these content libraries or e-learning? I want to sort of say that all of these things do have meaningful use cases where they make sense. But when it comes to the organizational sharing of the organizational know-how, which is constantly shifting and changing, we feel that our approach with peer learning has certain advantages. So I want to sort of go over some of these things. Like, for example, we feel that, you know, we are able to tap into this decentralized pool of subject matter experts that are all around the company, and they're constantly coming and going. We realize it's not easy for us to go and develop and maintain a piece of content that we don't actually control, or, you know, that we're not really truly subject matter experts on. The rate of change is, in our industry and definitely at Twitter, pretty high. And investing in a polished piece of, say, e-learning for a relatively limited audience may not make sense if the underlying technology is constantly evolving. This is, by the way, not necessarily true for outside, like commodity learning, like, for example, say Scala or Android or iOS or Hadoop. These things tend to have, quote unquote, public APIs that tend to stay somewhat stable over time. Within a company, when it comes to like the application of these technologies, it's constantly evolving at an even much, you know, a more rapid pace of change. We really need to make it easy and cheap and low cost to start. Otherwise people are not going to show up, and again, we have limited resources. But more importantly, we need to make it cheaper to maintain. So if we make things overly polished, they become actually harder to keep up with that rate of change that I mentioned. We want to allow things to be customized, often on the fly. And this is something that instructors can bring when they're teaching. And you can't easily encode into and anticipate in sort of content that's more supposed to be self-standing. We really want to optimize for culture immersion. This actually may seem like just like a bullet point, but we feel that peer-to-peer learning is just more than just learning. It's about portraying the culture that you want in the organization. It's welcoming people to the organization, to the team, to your tool, to your service. We feel that this actually provides much more value than, say, a new engineer joins up a company and is just pointed to a bunch of docs or a bunch of videos they're supposed to watch on their own. While that's okay, we feel the culture immersion is an important aspect of what we want to optimize for. And then customer connection. This is actually what's interesting is subject matter experts are not just there to teach what they know in their areas of expertise, but they often are representing their teams and their team's services or tools that they offer internally. And they learn from what they teach. They learn where there's, you know, sharp edges in what they offer. They learn how they can make things better. In fact, like we've actually had classes where a goal was to shorten the class from multiple days to 2 hours by realizing that there was just like too much redundancy, too much hardship, if you will, on things that people needed to learn and do in order to accomplish a task. So that was actually a good thing, eliminating learning by sort of learning from your audience where the pain points are. We feel that peer learning does help us scale our impact as a team. It does help us sort of create these cultural norms I mentioned. And it also enables us to sort of have fairly fast turnaround time. Like a lot of these other things that I mentioned take very long to develop, and time to market is important. We really do want, for example, when our leadership comes in and say, hey, we want the entire organization to learn about new practices around SDLC, how we do software development lifecycle, we were able to do that within weeks to have, you know, things up and running. And then within a quarter, like train up an entire engineering organization of 600 people. Because we're able to sort of tap into that expertise and do things sort of with that scale. It's also, I think, a channel for leadership. Whenever we are, say, adopting a new technology or a new practice, the leadership can tap into this channel to sort of make that be not only heard, but understood and internalized and acted upon, which is different than like leadership sending an email and say, okay, you know, this is the new practice. Through this, we're able to actually reach people and have them really resonate with the message from leadership faster. And then we happen to have videos, but that's kind of more of as a side effect. We don't really optimize for creating videos. We just encourage all of the live classes to be recorded so that people can watch videos if they want to afterwards. So what are these alternatives? Like, you know, obviously self-paced content libraries, docs, office hours, you know, one-on-one project mentorships, on-the-job learning, which is obviously probably the main way people learn. And then not learning. We feel that all of these things in some ways compete with us, but they also complement what we do. But the not learning is the part that we kind of want to eliminate whenever possible. So we think about these costs, we need to think about these trade-offs when sort of deciding what makes the most sense. And in some cases, we have recommended people go to a content library or work with an external vendor. But we think about the costs of developing and maintenance. We think about the quality and polish and how much of that is actually necessary. We think about the maintainability of content and durability of sort of these learning experiences. We think about the time to market, how quickly we're able to, again, reach our audiences when a demand is identified. What is the time to competency? How long does it take for a new engineer to become competent and sort of be at that, what we call old-timer status? And then time to adoption, when there's, again, new topics or new organizational sort of policies being pushed out, like how long does it take for the organization to adopt these and internalize these? How much do we care about cultural immersion? Do we need, like, for example, if someone's just learning about Python, maybe it's okay that they're not be culturally immersed. But if they're learning how to use Python in Twitter to do data science, we actually want to tell them a larger story that is optimized for them, understanding that cultural sort of background. The scale, and I'll talk about that in more detail. And of course, as I mentioned, customization, and then finally, customer empathy. The customer empathy is sort of in the context of teams that are teaching their customers, internal customers, how things work. They're able to empathize with them in a better way than if they were just, pointing to docs and say good luck and not have that sort of ongoing conversation with their customers. We feel that peer learning does enable us to avoid siloing of knowledge and their organizational know-how, because it helps, people are encouraged to spread that organizationally across the entire organization. Over time, it helps us achieve better human flexibility. So people don't just stay experts in their own domain, but they're able to sort of learn adjacent things. So for example, if I'm an SRE where I'm responsible for maintaining reliability of service, I really may want to be able to learn how to read data and make sense of reliability data that requires me to pick up some data science skills. We want people to sort of expand their human flexibility, as we call it, but like the know-how across multiple domains. We feel that this does offer long-term career growth. We want people at Twitter to have the best time of their careers at our company and grow their careers as a result of being here. And we want to optimize for diversity of knowledge, but also even we actually use teaching as a form of championing diversity by putting sort of and asking our female instructors to actually take the forefront and help teach things. We actually feel that it helps us demonstrate our leadership's commitment to actually investing in these roles and investing in these diverse pools of candidates. Two questions that inevitably come up. What about quality? You know, how are you able to just entrust a whole bunch of engineers who, you know, don't know teaching to do a good job? We actually think that perfect is the enemy of the good. It's okay to start scrappy. It's completely okay to have them fail initially and then iterate, learn, and get better. And it's okay to avoid over-engineering. We realize that we actually don't need to certify instructors. We don't need to have extensive checks and balances in order to avoid screw-ups. In practice, as I mentioned, our NPS of 70 has helped us sort of optimize for knowledge sharing without running into a lot of sort of challenges with quality. And then what about the scale? Like all of these other mediums may offer better scale, but as I said, we are able to scale through growing the number of instructors we have outside of our team. We think about scale in terms of the reach we're able to have as a result of these diverse instructors and diverse topics. We're able to scale the number of, you know, these topics and the rate of change these topics go through, or concepts, and the number of locations in which we're able to have our presence. Our team is used to be very San Francisco centric, but we're able to actually serve audiences in all these Twitter locations, although nowadays that's kind of like a little bit of a moot point since everyone's working from home. And then I'll just mention the last 2 points is that we do invest in these like so-called delegate administration. We call them course maintainers, where we empower these instructors not only to own their content, but even own the scheduling and sort of data and signal around their content. So they get automatically notified, for example, when someone's requesting their class or when their class hasn't run in a while. And then we have these university ambassadors. I think of them almost like as franchises. So these are folks in these remote offices who essentially are our ears on the ground on what people want and help us sort of you know, get additional signal and then coordinate with them on how to best meet that demand. So with that, I'll just summarize with some of my takeaways. We think that peer learning really does help scale the organizational know-how and that understanding across the organization. We think that subject matter experts are already willing and able to teach, that we just need to tap into that. We think that we should focus, and organizations like ours should focus on reducing the friction and unlocking that potential to help amplify this learning and these voices. And that it's really helpful to have a platform that helps you automate and encode the best practices so that we can focus on providing where humans can actually provide the most value. So with that, I will thank you for your time and attention, an opportunity for me to share my story, and I'm happy to take any questions. Marco, I think will facilitate the next part.
Thank you, Saša. Awesome talk. And I've been watching the questions, and there's been a lot of questions. So what I've been doing is sort of like trying to group them together to make sense of it. So I'll start with some bullet points, but feel free to either unmute yourself if you want to add any flavor to that, or if you want to ask the question directly as well. We have about 15 minutes or so. So one question that I sort of heard between the lines is, how do you go about selling this concept up to the management, right? Like, how do you justify the ROI? Like, why would my manager allow me to go teach? Am I not a highly paid Twitter engineer whose job is to write code? And now I'm going and doing this, like, you know, classes for fun, right? Like, so how do you justify that? How do you sell it up?
Yeah, so great question. And I will say that we in some ways got lucky because there was already to a degree like that practice was established in a very much smaller way with this engineering flight school or engineering NHO. But I sort of see it as like it's actually never been an issue. In fact, we've never had a manager come and say, hey, this person is spending too much time teaching. In fact, we worked with our management leadership to be like, look, we want to encode these things in the career ladder so that people are not only recognized for it, but they're almost realizing this is an expected thing for them to do as they go up in their sort of on the totem pole, if you will. You can break this up in a couple of different buckets. Like there's teams internally who have internal audiences, and for those folks to go and teach to their own customers about their tools and platforms, it's a no-brainer. Like this is a at scale way of meeting your customer. There's zero friction to like, why would you not do that? Like it's cheaper than office hours. It's cheaper than sort of one-on-one coaching. It's much higher fidelity than sort of just helping people on Slack. It's something that should be part of everyone's toolbox if they have internal customers. With respect to sort of onboarding and sort of teaching things that are more kind of cross-cutting and don't belong to a particular team, that's where I can see more of like a pushback. But most engineering managers have been very accommodating, and I don't, to be honest, know what the secret sauce was, other than we just kept on asking and they kept on saying yes. And maybe over time, it just, they realize this is part of our culture. And I actually believe this is part of, most organizational cultures. They just need to uncover that. So for the most part, it's not been an issue. Like, I don't know if that's the satisfying answer. We sort of never had to really fight for that time and energy. Instead, we just we did acknowledge it, and we did talk to them, and including our leadership, but they always were supportive of it. So you can say maybe we just got lucky.
And sort of to riff off of that, so you mentioned you have about 10-20% of volunteer engineers teach on a regular basis. So that's a couple of hundred engineers teaching. How do you onboard them? How do you maintain quality? How do you provide visibility to their managers that they're doing this, if you do that at all? And Susan's been asking, how does this even compare to full-time instructors? Is there such a thing? So something around the quality and getting these volunteer engineers up to speed.
Yeah.
That loop in measuring.
Fair. So one of the, so first I'll say there's a number of engineers who are at Twitter who happen to have prior experiences teaching. Maybe because they have PhD and they've done it at a university, or they just haven't, done that in the industry somewhere. Maybe that's like, say, a quarter of our instructors. So for them, it's very easy to sort of do this. It's almost it's natural. Like they require very little support. There are those who have always had a knack for this, always had an interest for this, always been curious on how they sort of share the knowledge or meet other people, and they just have a strong drive. And those people also tend to be fairly good at it. Like we realize that they don't really require a lot of prodding, even though might have not had prior experience. I would say, at least, half of our instructors tend to do well right from the get-go, like, maybe in addition to that quarter. So like another 2 quarters. And then for the last quarter, people who are less sure about themselves, who sort of feel like, yeah, they want to do this, but they're not really sure if they would do well, and they have a little bit of that imposter syndrome. We have sort of a gradual onboarding. Like, so we may ask them to come in and attend a bunch of classes, and then act as a TA to help answer questions, then teach a particular module of a particular class with our full-time instructor or somebody else present to jump in and support him. Then kind of they do more. And it's a sort of like an iterative process for them to get to a point where they feel comfortable being alone in a room of new faces they've never met, and teaching them stuff that is fairly complicated, fairly, technical, and not feel like they're going to be found out for not knowing. Like, people get comfortable sort of stepping into that role over time. And I mentioned, like, we do have automatic mechanisms by which we find out if there is sort of low quality, and that it does enable us to follow up. A lot of the time it's missed expectations. Like, people have different expectations of what the class is going to be, and not really about the instruction. But when it is about instruction, we do try to work with the instructor. And there were a few instances where, like, people just really had a hard time and they kind of stopped doing it. We didn't really find a way for them to win. But in most cases, people are able to sort of grow into providing that high quality expertise.
Got it. So Ben's been asking a lot of questions about, like, about what does a typical class look like, right? Maybe if you take a typical sort of class, how did it come about? What's its length? Like, is it days, hours? How many people participate? And also with work from home shift, what does that experience look like online? And then how do you close the loop on all that? Do you do an NPS score, or like what does that look like if you had to paint a picture of a typical to the university class? What does that look like?
Yeah, so in terms of the length, I would say most classes are, between 1 to 2 hours. But that doesn't mean that's kind of where the learning stops, because like I said, a lot of these things are tied into a larger narrative, so they complement each other. We just feel that it's easier for people to sort of absorb knowledge in this way over time and fit it into their calendars. The way we would develop it is someone would, like I said, either knock on our door, or we would identify a need. Then we would collaborate on that sort of syllabus, like what are the real objectives? Who is this for? What are the prerequisites? What should we go through? Like, what are these high-level topics? Let's get this in front of people, make sure that they validate this is something they would want to take, that there's demand for this. But as I mentioned, like we go through multiple iterations, and we're able to sort of fine-tune things. People that that also have subject matter expertise, but maybe haven't signed up for teaching, they would come and join us and sort of sit in on these canary classes and sort of offer guidance on, like, redirect it in a particular way. Say like, hey, you're missing this, or this is change, or this is superficial, or this is hard to understand. So that sort of like helps us slowly converge on what we think the final product needs to look like. And even then, we continue to iterate afterwards. In terms of like the attendance, some classes get, like they're about, I don't know what the average is. I should actually look at that data, but like maybe 15 participants. We had it, as few as like 5, and as many as, over 100. Classes tend to run, some are very frequently run, maybe once a month initially while there's a lot of demand. Afterwards they may go to like once a quarter, maybe then even less frequently, depending on maybe the technology has fallen out of favor and we deprecated content in the class. So it sort of varies. And in terms of the online, I will say that it's prior to COVID, it's been a challenge to sometimes do these classes that are half online and half in person, because it's really hard for the instructor to pay attention to an online audience as well as a live audience and do a good job serving both. Like very, very few of our instructors are capable of doing that. And we would prefer to do it one or the other, like either everyone's online or everyone's in person. But again, with some people, we've been able to do both. Since COVID, actually, our numbers have been up. Like our number of students, registrations, just the number of student hours is like one of our leading metrics, has been up. And so the quality has also stayed relatively high. I think it dropped a few points, but it's close to 70, maybe it's like 68 now. But that's more because we've been adjusting to sort of this new medium. We are also experimenting with how to incorporate different tools. Like we don't use, for example, Zoom, we use Google Meet. So we're like, how do we use Slack on the side to incorporate this sort of feedback loops and people to sort of feel part of a community and part of, how do we handle questions? Like, so we are iterating on that, but for the most part, demand has definitely stayed up, and we haven't seen issues there. And then the instructors, we do have, like I said, 2 full-time instructors, and they do teach part of their time, but their number one job is to help enable others and to help create these, like I said, larger narratives, larger stories, to help identify demand, to help sort of run these as ongoing programs, to help coach, our other instructors. So they're basically instructing instruction to others.
Got it. And so, can you give us maybe, I don't know how comfortable we are sharing numbers, but what's the volume? How many student hours or anything like that? Is that like a known thing, and how do you manage all that at scale, right? Logistics. I think Lou was asking that.
Yeah. So as I mentioned at the beginning, I believe here, let me just go back to the first slide or one of the first slides. It's about, 6,000. So we measure like student hours. Like we think it's not in a perfect measure, but we think that people vote with their time, right? Like they wouldn't keep on coming back if they were not getting value out of this. So it's a sort of like an indirect measure of what they're getting out of it. And we do differentiate things that we prescribe to them during the onboarding versus things that they electively sign up for. And so again, about, up to 6,000 hours per month. This is varied over time. There's some months where it's higher, some months that it's lower. We in the past had sort of OKRs, goals of say 25, 30, 40,000 per year. And so that's kind of how that's worked. In terms of like, how do we do 100 classes per month? Well, we, like I said, have a system that does all the automation. We are able to, that system tells us like which classes are available, automatically handles like connecting people's interests to the courses that are being scheduled. They get automatically notified. The instructors get automatically notified. We automatically get notified if a room declines on us for whatever reason. So we're able to deal with that. So it's really through this platform and through the automation that we were able to take on so much scale and not worry about screw ups. We've had very few screw ups over the years where like, everything's, gone wrong and like people show up at the wrong time or wrong place or something else. It's worked out really well. And I think it's largely thanks to our platform.
Got it. And speaking of that, you mentioned something earlier about rapid iteration and like sort of like perfect is the enemy of good, and like testing things by throwing them out there and seeing if it sticks. It seems like it's not very intuitive approach to developing a learning program. It's definitely against the grain when you look at the traditional learning and development. So can you maybe like just give us a why and how do you do that?
I mean, that trick is actually something that predates Twitter. You and I did this back at our previous startup where, we would go and put courses up for people to sign up for before they even existed. To see whether or not there was demand for it. And we just kind of took that at Twitter too. We basically would, try to figure out what was the syllabus, like what was the objective? Who were we targeting? What is it? What is the pitch for a particular course? And then we would schedule it like months from now, like say, 2 months from now. And then advertise it as if it was real. And if we don't see much demand for it, we may just kill it and say like, hey, we're not actually, going to move forward with this. But if we do, then we work with those folks to go and develop it. And the first one, again, is always, almost always a canary class. So we actually call it, whatever, data science at Twitter canary, right? And it's expected that people are not going to get a full-fledged content. Instead, they're going to sort of be there to help provide feedback. And that's fine. Like, that lowers the barrier to entry and manages expectation on both sides. So people don't feel like they need to live up to some imaginary bar that's hard to hit. And then they're able to learn and iterate from there.
And so keeping the slide on, so it seems like there's a huge volume of engagement here. The numbers seem relatively high. You also mentioned that Twitter University is not the only thing at Twitter. So how does Twitter University compare to what else is available there, like HR, L&D, or subscription to Pluralsight or whatever? What else is available to me as an engineer there, for example?
There's 3 other learning sort of organizations at Twitter. One is called the Learning and Development, which is within HR, and they primarily focus on sort of ethics training, soft skills training, management training, sort of, what I would argue probably most HR organizations tend to focus on. They don't focus on technical skills, right? And we do, for example, partner with them on the initial onboarding because like they run part of the onboarding and then we take over. So we want to make sure that those handoffs are smooth. And we've partnered with them in the past on like soft skills training for technical folks. Like for example, there's a course we call TWIG, which is like technical leadership right? And since it kind of like crosses both domains, it works out well. I don't know like what their metrics are. Actually, that's been kind of a little bit of an unknown. They use a different system because they're very e-learning centric, and so they measure things differently than we do. We also have like a sales learning organization that focuses on onboarding new sales folks as well as like partners that, you know, Twitter partners. And then there's like a user agent training, which focuses on onboarding sort of folks that act as our user agents that, you know, support Twitter users. And they do use different systems and different metrics. So unfortunately, there's no easy apples to apples comparison between our orgs.
Got it. Cool. I'm just checking time, and we have a couple of minutes to sort of wrap things up and give you the time back. So this was Saša Alexander from Twitter University, sharing about Twitter University and peer learning there and how that works and how that's been working over the last 7 years since we started that. So thank you for that.